So, hi everyone, my name is Izzy and I am one of the customer success managers here at Vvox. And I am joined today by Alice Luby, who is from TU Dublin. So before we get started and I hand over to Alice, who'll be talking more ways of how to engage students using Vvox, just wanted to get you all on to the Vvox app. So we will be using Vvox throughout today's session. So if you have any questions for either myself or Alice, please post them through the Vvox Q&A board. We've left some time towards the end to go through your questions. So please do like any questions that are sent in by others, as we will be filtering the questions by most liked to answer the most popular questions. Perfect. So thank you so much for joining, and thank you to our guest speaker, Alice Luby. So Alice is from TU Dublin, and TU Dublin are one of have an account with Vvox, which started back in September, and Alice also helped with the rollout of Vvox at TU Dublin. So Alice has almost 30 years experience lecturing in higher education. She's currently employed within TU Dublin, and she's located in the city campus. So I won't introduce Alice too much, as I will leave that up to her. So without further ado, I will pass over to Alice now. So I am just going to make you the presenter, Alice.
So this session is about engaging students using Vvox. So as Izzy said, I'm Alice Luby. I'm lecturing in accounting for nearly 30 years, feel rather old at this stage. But more significantly for this session, I've been using polling software for well over 10 years. And importantly, I was part of the TU Dublin evaluation panel when we went to go out looking for polling software which we would roll out to the whole institute. So basically, we now have a site license for Vvox, which means every member of staff has the ability to use it. As part of that evaluation, I piloted Vvox in March, April with my own classes, and subsequent to that, I've been using Vvox polls and Q&A for both virtual delivery and Vvox and face-to-face deliveries. So that's just a little bit of the context and the background as to where we're at. So why Vvox? Right, in the pilot evaluation, key things that we were looking at was that it was web-based. So some of our staff were using things like Menti, and they were well used to it within that type of a setting. Other members of staff were using PowerPoint, Turning Point with the PowerPoint ribbon. So one of the major criteria we had was we wanted a product that gave us both a web-based solution and a PowerPoint ribbon. Very quickly, when we evaluated Vvox, we seen that it was very clean and simple to use. The interface is very user-friendly. One of my daughters actually pointed out, because she is Vvox in another institution in Dublin, and she said she liked that it looked professional. Other products, such as, say, Kahoot, looked quite childish, and it was what she remembered for her school days, not from her university, not what she would anticipate at university. So one of the things she had commended with Vvox was its professional look. A selling point given by Vvox, which I thought at first was an excuse, but actually really is a good selling point. You're not overwhelmed with unnecessary features. You have what you need. And the biggest benefit that you have is that you have the Q&A board as well as polling. It was quite funny because I think it was Joe probably, in the first sales pitch he was doing to the panel, said about the Q&A board, and I said, yeah, but you have a Q&A board in Bongo, you have a Q&A board in Teams, why would you want another one? And he went, but ours is anonymous, and I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes. So importantly for us, we felt it was the opportunity for a fresh start. We had tried Turning Point before, not many staff took it up. This was going to be a new fresh start for us. And then another good thing was the rapport we had with the Vvox team did stand out. One of the things that had amazed me within the sequence of what was happening and working with Vvox was even having access to the delivery team. So just to kind of give context, what's Vvox about? We have the option of live polls, surveys, and the anonymous Q&A board. From the academics perspective, we have the option of using it web-based, or we can embed it within a PowerPoint presentation. And I've noticed somebody putting in a question there on the Q&A board. Yes, it is possible to convert Turning Point's questions into Vvox really simply and really straightforward. And just to kind of put your minds at ease on that one, I had come into the evaluation being very biased on Turning Point because it was Turning Point I'd used for 10 years. And I personally only wanted Turning Point until I seen Vvox in action. And the switch over to Vvox was seamless. It was really good and really straightforward for us. So from a student's perspective, they have the option, as you're now all witnessing because you're using the Q&A board, of a very user-friendly student interface. You can use it on your mobile phone, web browser, or within a laptop or tablet. And for those of you who deliver in Microsoft Teams from a virtual perspective, there's also an add-in for that too, which is super. So let's look at two things in Vvox, polls and the Q&A board. So from a background point of view, why would I use polls? Now, I've been using these over 10 years. Keeps attention and focus during the session. From a student's perspective, you put them in a large, hot classroom, lecture room, and you have them for an hour. From a human point of view, it's very hard to keep your attention. After 10 minutes, you'll start drifting. After 20 minutes, you've possibly gone. The benefit of using polls embedded in the middle of your lecture is that it actually refocuses them. It gets their attention back and it allows them to interact with the material. So it engages them. And what they know from the onset of the class is, hang on, I'm going to get a question in a few minutes. I need to stay with this. And then when they put in their question, it allows them to check their understanding so they can see how they are doing. But importantly, it's providing them with feedback. Did they get it right or wrong? How are they doing against the rest of the class? So overall, it's an interesting and modern approach that engages them and keeps them awake. From my perspective, it provides me with a dynamic environment. Instead of talking at students for an hour and not getting much kind of response from them, and every class kind of feeling the same when you're talking about the same thing, I went from being very static into a very dynamic environment where no two classes are the same, because different students learn different things, they're reacting in different ways. I found that my students were now much more engaged and active. They weren't zoned out and falling asleep. But really, really important for me, I suddenly had the ability to gauge if they were actually understanding what I was presenting as I was presenting it. Not waiting for the exam, but as I was presenting it, I could see where they were getting lost. And if you stagger the polls throughout the session, you can see the parts of the content that they're starting to lose. And when they're starting to lose the content, then it provides me with the opportunity to re-explain what they don't understand. So I would be very student-centered, and I would have a strong student perspective on things. So I would quite regularly survey them and get their opinions. So the following came straight from student surveys. Extremely useful because it helps you get quick feedback on how you are doing as well as how the class is doing. It helps keep me focused during the class. I also like the way it's anonymous. So if you're not embarrassed if you get the question wrong. And I've found over the years that this one is huge. They were always afraid to ask a question or answer a question in case they got it wrong. Okay, so I'll step back for a second and kind of place a context to where we're at. As you all know, most of the world went into lockdowns at some stage around March 2020, there or thereabouts. And the university sector was plunged into this remote teaching virtual world. Lucky for me, I had a fair bit of experience of virtual delivery. So it wasn't too much of a frazzling, but what I found was the students didn't take well to it. And you'd expect them to put on mics or you'd expect them to put in comments in the text chat, but you really felt like there was no one there. No mics were coming on and there was nothing into the text chat within Bongo, which is the package that we were using. So after a couple of weeks, I called the class reps together and we had a meeting with class reps. And I kind of said, look, does everybody seem to follow everything that's going on? I'm not getting any questions. And this exact word for word was what the student said. No questions may not mean that everybody understands. It can be the result of total confusion for some students who then just zone out. And that was an awakening. But I said, but why don't you ask in the text chat? Why, why don't you just come in? Well, we're not going to ask because it looks stupid. We're the only ones and we look stupid and that type of thing. So in and around this period of time, we were looking at Vvox, and I started to trial the anonymous Q&A board. Well, I have to say my virtual deliveries changed instantly. I went from being completely passive, thinking I'm the only person on this session, into suddenly a really dynamic environment. Within the first day of using it, I started getting the questions coming in, like, as you can see on the print screens there. So we don't put 56 on the balance sheet. But what does corporation tax for? What do you mean by PA? And then in some of the classes, they then delve on into things that were causing them anxiety. Will we have time for revision? Where's the survey you want us to do? How many more topics have we to do? Is there no quizzes this week? So different things would come in. And what I felt was suddenly the audience, the students, had a platform to ask the questions. I know it is just coming up on the screen because my eyes for a minute have looked up at the Vvox chat, and somebody has asked me, have I collected student feedback on this? Yes, I have. I've lots of feedback. And if you look at the little bubble notes that's in my presentations, these are all things that have come directly from student feedback. So yes, I have got a lot of information back from students on this. And actually, surprisingly, when we first went into lockdown, I went into remote delivery. I didn't immediately use, it was Turning Point at the time. I didn't immediately use Turning Point because I couldn't get it working. And I can say I couldn't get it working because it was Turning Point. So I didn't use it for 2 or 3 weeks, and I was chatting to some of the students online afterwards, and I said, like, how are you finding virtually? Literally, they replied back, bring back the polling questions. We can't manage without the polling questions. We missed the polls. So when we initially went online, I wasn't using polls, and the students themselves proactively said, please bring back the polls. And that came in strongly, in terms of student feedback. So just another bit of student feedback there. The anonymous apps really did help and make it easier for me to ask any questions that I wanted. Okay, back to the Vvox situation and what you get with Vvox. So within the browser, there's slightly more question type options: multiple choice, word cloud, text, rating, numeric, XY plot, and pin on the image. Multiple choice, the multiple choice, word cloud, text, rating, and numeric is within the PowerPoint ribbon. So there's slightly less available within the PowerPoint ribbon. And later on, I'll be telling you my approach as to which I use, and I do use both of them, and I do have a preference. So somebody asked about the student feedback. This one is a really interesting one. And what I find is when I talk to my colleagues about the running polls, they only think MCQs, multiple choices. They don't think beyond MCQs. I personally use word clouds an awful lot, way, way more than multiple choice. And feedback that came back from one of the students, the amount of interaction with the class made it more engaging, especially the use of a word cloud where you could see some of the other answers people had submitted. So they actually liked being able to see the way other people worked out their answers, not just the kind of guessing A, B, C, or D. Okay, so how do I approach Vvox and how do I use it? I have a number of different ways. So from a pedagogy delivery point of view, I have one session where I deliver brand new content. I have another session where I'll demonstrate a question being done, and I have another session where I'll try and establish how well they're doing. So in my first session where I'm presenting new material, I use PowerPoint and I have the polls embedded within PowerPoint. So basically what I do here is I run a few PowerPoint slides, I run a few polls within PowerPoint. When the student's answers comes up, I use a graphic pad with a pen if I'm doing it virtually, or I'll use the whiteboard if I'm doing it in a classroom, because I use this approach in both. It's used in both virtually and in a classroom in the same way. I will review their answers that they've given me. I'll explain why the wrong answer is wrong, and I will show the detailed calculations to the right answer, because a lot of my work will be calculation based. Then I'll continue on with a couple of PowerPoint slides. I'll run another sequence of polls, and then I'll be reviewing the answers and re-explaining the content. And that goes on until I get through the hour. I'm seeing some of the questions coming in there, so I'll tackle those in a couple of minutes. One of them that has caught my eye is, what sort of questions would I ask in word cloud? To be honest, because I teach accounting, I could ask, I could give a little scenario with numbers in it and then say, what is the increase, how much is increase in provision is needed, for example, and they type in numbers. And I can actually see the whole range of calculations and where they would go wrong with it. In other cases, I would ask, you know, what accounting concept does this scenario relate to? And they type in the relevant word. So for my demo questions, all I use is a bit like what I'm doing today. I'd have an Excel spreadsheet where I'm typing up my answer as I'm talking through it, and they could see the question on my screen as well. But on a separate screen, I have the Q&A board that my other eye is looking out, and I'm looking at the questions coming in, so I can see, they missed where depreciation came from, and I'll re-explain it. So in demoing a question, my Q&A board is used exactly as I'm using it today, where your questions are coming in and I'm keeping an eye on them. So polls aren't for every class, and don't overuse them. Then in other sessions, I will literally run almost like assessment type questions. So I'll be running through an exam question, and I'll break it up with exam standard questions that are being gone through with the whole class. And then for my tutorials, my tutorials are on site, on campus. And sometimes what I will do is, if nobody is asking questions, I will put up, which is exactly what happened to me yesterday, silence in the class. So I put up the Q&A board, and the honesty came through then. 17 comments flashed up in front of me. And I will sometimes have the Vvox browser as a backup plan for tutorials if nothing is coming through on questions. Right, so a lot of talking, and I do talk fast, so I'll pause for a minute. One of the problems with technology, and I'm not talking Vvox in particular here, but one of the problems with technology is that some people jump at it and use it for the sake of it almost, without weighing it up. And I do think you have to look pedagogically wise, why am I doing this? Am I doing it in the right way for the right reasons? So just for a couple of minutes, I wanted to talk about my way of doing this. So my motive for using it, personally, I only really use Vvox for engagement. Engagement is my main aim. I want the students to be engaged, and then second to that, I want to get them to have feedback on how they're doing against their peer. I am not using it for assessment purpose. And from one of my daughters who actually was in college and had Turning Point used at the start of every class for assessment, absolutely hated it, constantly under pressure, and created a bad impression with her because it was assessment. It was draconian, if you know what I mean, rather than engagement and encouraging. So personally, I would go look at it as being, you know, proactive for engagement as opposed to judging them. Platform, I use it fairly similarly, both virtually and face-to-face, and I'm equally comfortable with it in both formats. And then the last thing is, when I've seen comments coming through about this, in the how to deploy it, do you use PowerPoint ribbon or a browser? I'm really comfortable delivering some of my content in PowerPoint. So I love the PowerPoint ribbon, and I find it really helpful. And when I'm using the polls in that context, I'm really only using the MCQs and the word cloud. So it's enough for me. However, in different situations, I have made use of the hotspot pin-on type questions, which I kind of like. And I love the text question when you're in the browser. Doesn't work well in PowerPoint, but it works brilliant in the browser. And I love that in a tutorial type setting. Okay. This kind of sums up things for me really well. These are not my words, I wish they were. This came through on what we call our Q6 survey at the end of term last year from a student. And I thought they'd articulated it really well. It's literally a copy and paste from a student's survey. The approach to learning through engaging the students during the lecture by using the learning apps to ask questions instead of just talking for the full hour played a massive role in my understanding. It helped keep me interested and focused all the way through, because usually I would zone out or go on my phone when I got bored. And to me, that was success, if you know what I mean, because I wanted this to be engaging. I wanted it for them to stay focused, and I felt I've got this. Another thing that came in on the same survey, different student, I liked how anonymously interactive it was. It was engaging, and we got to answer questions without our name being put on it. And that is huge to students, absolutely huge to students. Okay, and this is my second last slide. And this was one of my major benefits when I started using polls. Prior to polls, I would see students becoming disengaged quite quickly. Accounting can be a difficult topic to learn. And I'd seen, particularly on one survey, because I read the surveys quite a lot, a student had written down, I felt stupid. From the first or second class, I'd lost track. I felt thick. I was too afraid to ask a question. I felt I was the only one who didn't know. And what I now find is when you use polls, and maybe I shouldn't admit this, but quite often, like 75% of the class might get the question right, which means 25 get it wrong. So maybe I'm not such a good teacher. There's no longer only one feeling stupid. They can now see there's a good proportion of the class grappling with the content like them. And polls used in that context removes isolation. It's no longer just me not understanding or me getting it wrong. And when you use the Q&A board, it's not just me having to ask questions. Lots of others are asking the questions too. So that's an added benefit. Right, so I'm looking at the time now and I'm trying to manage time here, and I see loads of questions coming in. So over to you. The floor is everybody's now at this point. And Izzy, you might pick out the good, not the good questions, but questions that we really need to address.
Yeah, no worries. I'm just going to take back control and share my screen. And just before, well, thank you, Alice. Just before we move over to the Q&A, there's just a couple of things that would be great to promote. So we've got a couple of upcoming webinars. So on the 23rd of February at 2 p.m, Lewis Terry from the Vvox customer success team will be running a masterclass. So become a PowerPoint polling pro. So I've actually included the link of where to sign up in the participant app on the information screen. So definitely come along to that if you're wanting to learn more about PowerPoint. And our next webinar in the Vvox Spring series, we are joined by Rick Roberts from Grace College, and he will be talking around Vvox versus clickers, and the winner is. So definitely get yourselves along to this one. Also, just to point out, it'd be great if we could get subscribers to our YouTube channel. So within our YouTube channel, we have lots of really great tutorials on how to do pretty much everything to do with Vvox, so that's the dashboard, the PowerPoint, any integrations we have. So definitely recommend subscribing. Also signing up to our newsletter, which includes any product updates, any features that you should know about, anything like that. And also if you could subscribe to our LinkedIn as well, because that would be great. So now we can move over to the Vvox Q&A board. So again, if you haven't already, please feel free to join by scanning the QR code or joining at vvox.app and entering the 9-digit ID, which is on screen. I'm just going to bring up the Q&A board and go into full screen. Perfect. So I'm going to order this by most liked. So if there are any comments on there that you'd like to be answered, please go through and like them. So the top one is just, hi, looking forward to this. So hello back. Hope you enjoyed the webinar. So I have seen a couple of questions or comments in here about the workload, which is pointed out in the top question that there was an update to Vvox a couple of months ago, which now allows you to send in multiple words instead of sending in a hyphen in the middle of either word. So thank you to whoever posted that. So I am just going to go, just going to scroll through just to see if there are any questions in here for Alice.
While you're looking there, Izzy, I've picked out a couple of questions that I've seen as well that could be,
yeah, of course.
that jumped out. So while you're looking, I'll address a couple of them. Somebody asked, did I use the leaderboard? Now, that's a matter of personal thing with academics. Some of my colleagues have used it and love it. I personally hate it. It is nothing to do with Vvox. I'm very student focused, and I work with the Disability Service, and I spend a lot of time trying to empower students to have confidence that will be weak. So a lot of my time is helping the lower ability students to try and bump their confidence, and the leaderboard is dominated by the A-star students, and I don't like using it because the competitive thing is working against what I'm trying to achieve, where I'm trying to build confidence in a weaker cohort. So that's just a personal opinion. I don't like leaderboard because to me it's a bit like class discrimination, the elite versus the strugglers, and I'm trying to reduce isolation rather than to create it. But that's a personal opinion on it. Somebody asked about negative feedback, and I think it's really important to watch the negative feedback. A really useful comment that came to me from a student, and I know it was a disability student, and they said quite openly was, I can't do the polls. I'm not doing the polls because the minute I pick up my phone, I see my notifications coming in and I start reading my notifications and I forget I'm in class and it distracts me. Hate the polls because they distract me. But there's always a solution, and what is absolutely fantastic this year is when I'm doing virtual, if we have the add-in on Teams, the questions come up on their screen. They no longer need their mobile phones, and that negativity is gone. So yes, there was comments. Some students felt very distracted by having a mobile device needed, but thanks to Vvox having that add-in Teams, that overcame that problem. Somebody asked, how do I manage the questions coming in versus, the content that I'm delivering? And basically, whether I'm in a classroom or whether I'm at home, I'm running with two machines. So I have a desktop computer in a lecture room or on my desk, and I also have a laptop. I have my PowerPoint running on one, and I have the Q&A board on the other. So if you ever see my eye going slightly leftways, I'm just looking at the Q&A board rather than being so I find two screens, with laptop down the PC, just invaluable from that one. I know some people are expressing concern about moderation of Q&A boards, and look, these sessions are also about the things that go wrong. What I would say is, virtually when I'm using the Q&A board, I have had no issues at all. Nothing that would cause me stress in a virtual delivery. However, when I use the Q&A boards and sometimes even the word clouds in a large classroom environment where there's a group of mates together, the Q&A boards can get silly comments put in. The way to overcome that is to put on moderation. And what I did have to do with one class group in October, put on moderation for 2 or 3 weeks. Can be painful because you then have a different process for going through senior questions. You have to release them when ready and that. And it was cumbersome, solved the problem. And what I found was, after about 3 weeks, I switched off moderation and they didn't realize, and the messing had stopped. So there are ways to do it. I love the Q&A boards, and I take the risk of things going wrong. I have had occasions where it's wrecked my head because in the middle of doing something serious from a delivery point of view, I'm getting asked about an exam in 5 months' time that I don't really want to talk about. So now what I do at the start of the class is, not in a not in a dictative way, but look, during the course, during my delivery, feel free to ask anything about the content I'm delivering during the session. However, things to do with assessments and exams or other general comments, let's wait till the end, and that solves that problem. So you have your ground rules first. Izzy, do you have other questions?
Yes, I'm just having a look through here. So I'm just going to go to the next one. Lots of practical problems with embedding into PowerPoint. What I'd really like there would be the option to put a simple slide or image into my Vvox, use it as a whole presentation platform. So this is more of a feature request. So I will take that away with me, which is great. Thank you. A few here that I could just archive. Any tips on making slides look good? So formatting professional when looking to embed a Vvox into PowerPoint, it takes me a lot of time to make it look good. So any tips from you, Alice?
Sorry, I missed that. Sorry, this sounds really bad. Somebody caught my eye on the screen. What was it? What tips for?
So any tips on making, basically any tips on making your PowerPoint look professional? So when they're embedding Vvox into PowerPoint, sometimes it can take them a bit longer to make the PowerPoint look professional. So if you've got any tips.
What I've actually, this is my personal, this again, everything is based on personal opinion. I think the minimalist look that comes in when you create the Vvox poll looks good and is effective. I do have to customize mine because I will be putting, you know, accounting tables embedded some part on it, but I like the Vvox look and the way it comes in personally, and I wouldn't customize it too much other than I have to play around with a little bit to give like an accounting scenario in a corner. But my own personal point of view is the Vvox clarity is much better than, and this is not a criticism of others, and I've noticed somebody had put it in which was caught my eye. I found the graphics generated by Turning Point very clunky, and they kept changing and they kept distorting, and it was very problematic. That I think the best advice I would give to people from the time I've been using Vvox is stick with the defaults of what's there. It does it well, and just only bring in an illustration that's absolutely essential to the question that you're doing. In my case, a couple of figures on a graphic linked in with the question at the top. But beyond that, I personally wouldn't recommend that much more. You can do your professional stuff within your other PowerPoint slides. And I also, what I tend to do is I have my Vvox polls questions in a different color, plain and simple, so that it immediately stands out to me. I'm now into the poll, and they know they're into the poll. So I actually keep them in the default so we know exactly what we're doing and why we're doing it.
Lovely, thank you. Yeah, it's just something that I was going to add is if you're doing a poll question on PowerPoint, you know, you can put images and everything like that onto your PowerPoint slide, but actually opening the poll, the participant will only see the poll. So if anything, it is best just to keep the poll on that slide, just so yeah, it's not distracting or anything like that. Just a tip from me. Perfect. There are a couple of questions in here that I will get back to, but just one I wanted to pick up was, does Vvox filter inappropriate language? So we do have a profanity filter built in, so that'll be on by default for your polling. So that's not something you need to worry about. I leave Q&A open all week for questions that I then answer online so everyone can see it. I also answer questions that I haven't had time for in the session, sometimes close to 100. Is there any way of sorting questions and adding headings? I can't think off the top of my head. I will get back to that one. I'm just going to have a look to see. I don't know if Alice, if you've got anything that you
I could jump in with a suggestion on that. I did a random, off the top of my head, question in the browser yesterday, and I was really stunned with all the comments that came in on it. And literally what I did was I just did a copy and paste, put it into Word earlier today. Now I'm assuming the same, yes, because I'm assuming the same will happen within the just double check. Yeah, you can do it. So basically what I did was just use my mouse to select every comment, pasted it into Word or Excel, and then I could sort them into the order that I wanted. So that was what I automatically did, and I found it was a nice way to capture it and put it into an order that I wanted. So I know it's probably not the answer that people want, but I found that was a really lovely way to do it.
Yeah, because downloading the data report as well, so that will download you the Excel file for you with the Q&A tab. So from there you can go through and you can order everything yourself. I've just noticed the time, and we've actually got to 2:40. So myself and Alice, we're just going to stay on for another 5 minutes just to answer a few more questions. But thank you all so much for joining. If you need to pop off, then please do. The recording to this webinar will be sent around to you all afterwards, and it will also be found on our YouTube channel within the next couple of days. But yes, thank you so much for joining. Please feel free to sign up to our next webinars. So the advanced PowerPoint polling with Lewis, and also our next webinar within this spring series with Rick Roberts on talking about clickers versus Vvox. So please do feel free to sign up to those, and hopefully we will see you soon. But please do carry on joining us, and we'll go through a few more questions for the next 5 minutes. Great, thank you. I'm just going to flick through some more questions. Just some comments in here that look great. We've got another one in here, Alice, about some students fooling around with the anonymous Q&A, unfortunately, so they've had to turn it off. But I think you've kind of covered that as to some workarounds. So using moderation.
So what I would encourage there is put the moderation on for a period of time. It stops the messing, and then try switching it back off without them realizing, and it can work.
Yeah. It's always good to kind of reiterate to the students why you're using Vvox. You're using it to help with engagement or anything like that. So I think once you kind of lay down why Vvox is here, hopefully they will then stop messing around with the Q&A and everything like that. But yeah, definitely recommend using moderation. I'm just going to scroll. Just to point out, I've got a question at the top saying, bit of a left field, sorry, this is more of a Vvox question, but bit of a left field question, but I'm using Vvox for a piece of research I'm doing on student engagement. To get the piece published, any idea on EdTech journals that may be interested? To whoever posted this question, please could you get in touch with us at education@vvox.com, and we can take this conversation further. That'd be great. Just seeing if there is any more questions. There's quite a few comments in here. Oh, where's it gone? Just got a comment in here. Thanks, Alice. I found my experience of using Vvox in the last semester quite similar to yours, both motivation and outcome. I tried to use Turning Point during the pivot period, but it was too clunky / off-putting for students. I ended up using forms and teams. Feedback shows that students liked and valued my use of Vvox in S1, both online and face-to-face.
I think a similar opinion coming through there anyway.
Cool. You've answered this one about the leaderboard feature, was great.
I noticed actually somebody else had put up a comment about teams. They divide group into teams, and I think that's a really good way of having a form of leaderboard without an individual feeling bad. And some of my colleagues are doing team-based. I think the question there was asking, can you assign teams, as in some of the other products do? Certainly what some of my colleagues have been doing at a simple level would be they put students into the groups to discuss a scenario, and one member enters the poll.
Yeah, so if you're doing that virtually as well, you can go into a breakout room, for example, and again, one person can log into Vvox. So yeah, there's a way you can do that virtually or online. I'm just having a look at the time. I'm just going to answer this one last question. So how long does the Q&A board stay open? Can it be used to get feedback after class? So yeah, the Q&A board is open. So as long as your session is still open and started, so basically if you haven't ended it manually, then the Q&A board will stay open and you can use it to get feedback after class. So that is another way of using Vvox in the asynchronous fashion. Cool. I am just wary of time as we've got to 1:45 now. So just to point out, I will get back to all of these questions. So I will download the Excel report and I will basically write answers to all of these questions down, and we will publish this for everyone to see. But yeah, really great. Thank you all for your questions, and thank you again for joining, and a big thank you to Alice for presenting today. It's really great to have yourself and TU Dublin on board. You know, as you've mentioned, you've been helping with TU Dublin from the start, so really great for you to join us today, and a big thank you.
And I think a lot of my colleagues are really enjoying using Vvox as well. It's become quite popular with a lot of people taking up, and certainly a lot more are getting on board with the polls and the Q&As than ever before. Great.
Amazing. Well, thank you again. If anyone needed an answer to their question urgently, feel free to get in touch. So it's either, if it's a support question, then it'll be support@vvox.com, or just a general inquiry, then education@vvox.com, and we will get back to you all. But have a lovely day, everyone, and we will see you soon.